My grievance is to the Minister for Planning, and I thank you, Minister, for taking my grievance. You're carrying the government this morning, Minister. My grievance relates to the fact that local councils and their planning schemes have been completely bypassed on planning decisions due to the continuation of rules drafted during the previous state of emergency to ensure that the WA building industry did not collapse. As my honourable colleague in the upper house, the Shadow Minister for Planning, the Honourable Neil Thompson, also questions, why did the Minister extend the rules crafted during the COVID pandemic which enable the Western Australian Planning Commission to make decisions about developments that don't comply with the very rules that the Western Australian Planning Commission is entrusted to oversee? These powers are now completely unnecessary. I remind the Minister the emergency planning laws were brought in to accommodate shovel-ready projects at a time when we feared the economic fallout from COVID-19 would hit Western Australians' economy very hard. However, the economic calamity did not eventuate, making the need for these changes irrelevant. In fact, our building industry is now completely overheated. Furthermore, many of the projects approved have yet to begin construction, demonstrating that they were far from shovel-ready when they were originally approved. The proposed development at 120 and 122 Marine Parade is a perfect example of these failures. 120 Marine Parade was approved as a shovel-ready project over 2 years ago, but is yet to start construction. Instead, the development is now the subject of dealings with neighbouring developers who have their own plans to incorporate the application to include the neighbouring property being 122 Marine Parade. The proposed development is 2 stories higher than the permitted height for this location, which was defined by an approved local planning scheme and endorsed by the local community. I also understand that there are another 2 current applications that do not comply with the government and community approved local planning scheme on the beachfront before the town of Cottesloe as I speak. The community supported the LPS 3 scheme, and that included increased development along the foreshore. It was a compromise between visible amenity impacts and also shadowing the beach. I can assure the members of this House that bypassing of local government and local communities' voices on planning decisions is not only occurring in Cottesloe, but is happening right across Western Australia, including in Bayswater. The continuation of these powers now begs the question, does the Minister see local governments and local communities as simply an inconvenience that must be bypassed in any planning decision? Local planning schemes must be respected and strategic planning policies must be adhered to. Despite what the law now allows after these new provisions were rammed through our Parliament on the back of COVID-19 and the previous state of emergency. Development must be considered holistically with reference to transport, congestion, public amenity, view corridors, overlooking, noise mitigation, and importantly, community expectations. Planning must be done with reference and respect to local communities. Ad hoc decisions through an uncertain process scrambled together under COVID is not the way forward. The McGowan government has even recently been forced to inject itself into individual developments due to these changes. The impact of this was demonstrated dramatically recently with the poor process around the proposed Charles Street upgrades, which the Minister had to backflip on after community outrage and probably after pressure from her ministerial colleague, the Honourable John Carey, member for Perth, and rejection of the proposal by the City of Vincent. On top of this, after being steamrolled by the WAPC over the developments on Marine Parade that I previously mentioned, the town of Cottesloe is now reviewing its local planning scheme and local planning strategy in order to play catch-up with the bevy of applications that are now rolling in under the COVID-inspired process. Sadly, and again, together with my upper house colleague, the Honourable Neil Thompson, I think that the outcome of this review will be irrelevant for key locations such as Marine Parade, where at last count 4 proposals under the COVID-19 initiated system have now been received. How can there be any confidence in the town of Cottesloe's public consultation on its new scheme when we see how easily it can be swept aside? For the Cottesloe foreshore, the current approach is certainly a far cry from the good work done under the Barnett government when the town of Cottesloe and the Department of Planning carried out an extensive inquiry by design process where everyone had a say and compromises were identified that most could live with, and that included supporting increased height along the foreshore. And I reject absolutely the contentions put forward by the Minister in the past that somehow the Council is against development. This is a town that has medium and high density already at around 50%, greater than almost any other area of Perth. The WA Liberal Party has a fundamental belief that the community needs a say in the design of our suburbs. We also believe the Minister should focus on making rules that ensure individual development decisions take account of local planning decisions and local community views and concerns. This used to be a tradition that had bipartisan support, but for some reason this is not the case under the McGowan government. What we see now is a lack of planning, a completely idiosyncratic process that does not follow orderly planning principles that take proper account of community concerns. Decisions are made that cause traffic chaos in suburban streets, ignore the capacity of services such as power, water and sewerage, or the proximity of appropriate public transport. And that was brought home forcefully at a public meeting which we conducted in Netherlands recently, where residents cannot access their own properties because of increased traffic density in their streets because of completely inappropriate high-rise development. We see long-term considered planning abandoned for short-term political concerns. We see consultation occurring after decisions have been made, not before, where local concerns can be accommodated. Consequently, I call on the Minister to ensure that local government and local community voices are respected when planning decisions are made, and that we revert to the previous planning process as it was prior to the changes made in the name of the COVID-19 pandemic. Immature comments about NIMBYs ignore genuine community concerns. I urge the Minister to replace the current ad hoc decision-making with considered long-term planning and make sure that new buildings comply with the approved local planning schemes. Thank you.
Minister for Planning.
I thank the member for that grievance, but I do want to outline some of his comments he's made in relation to name calling and so forth on this grievance. I think, first of all, it was the Liberal Party that brought in the DAP process, brought in DAPs.
Get used as an exception.
It was the Liberal Party who brought in DAPs. So you brought in DAPs. You also changed the multi-unit design codes to basically allow all multi-units above, I think it was R30 at the time. So you made some big changes, which you now obviously are walking away from. It also appears that you're asking for the right of veto, that members have a right of veto. So I think you're calling for third-party appeal rights, member, if that's what you're asking for? No. No.
Local planning schemes.
No. So you're wanting both sides, you're walking both sides of that fence. Look, the reality is that we have a system in place currently where councils are in charge of developing and the schemes and strategies for their area. Those schemes and strategies have to be current. They have to reflect the modern thinking. And so I urge all councils and all councils to make sure their schemes and their strategies are up to date. The other point I want to make very clearly, that it is very hard to work on long-term schemes or strategies with councils currently because there is no commitment to keep going on a strategy that might have been endorsed a couple of years ago. Councils are changing the course on matters all the time. And I'll take a couple of examples in my electorate of Swan, where I get approached to update a scheme to reflect a new project. I say, will you support this? Is this your proposal? Yes. So we go through an MRS. And then the council votes a couple of years later, a few changes in composition, they vote against it. It happens time and time again. You cannot do long-term planning currently with councils because they change their mind every 2 years. It's really hard. You know, I've got public servants that walk around, they go and consult with people, they come back saying the council's right on board. I said, are you sure? You sure they're all agreeing with it? Oh yeah, they're agreeing with it. And then we go through and then people saying, oh, we weren't consulting, we weren't doing this. I want to give the example of the Rilwood decision, where there's been some comments made in the paper. Now, you're talking about what role does the Minister for Planning have, what role we all have. We have a role to deliver good community. We have a role to deliver housing for people of Western Australia. Now, my role is to facilitate housing and developments for the state. That's what I have to do. I have to make sure there's enough land and there's enough zoning to allow people to buy homes and to live in good places. Now, I know there are some people who believe their suburb is fine, they don't want any change. I cannot have that view. If I had that view, we would not have new housing for people. And fundamentally, what are we about? Creating new homes for people to live in. We don't want, like I said, I see examples from the other states. Examples where without the right infrastructure, without the right access, people are spending 2 hours to get to work. 2 hours every day. I don't want that in this state. I don't want it. So our job is to look above and actually say, where shall we create the housing? The council's obligation is to work with schemes. And like I said, time and time again, I'm in a situation where I want to try and deliver a long-term strategy. Council says yes, and then 2 years later, they abandon it. I'll just talk about the Football West example where, remember, Football West was meant to be owned and controlled by the city, and 2 years later they said they don't want to do it, the new football centre. So now Football West is now looking at what to do. Who's going to be their landlord? It happens again and again. We try long-term strategies. The real example, I'm going to give this. This is a situation where the planning professionals, of which everyone discounts planners as if they don't exist. They think all decisions should be made by a group of people with no planning expertise whatsoever. So, pardon? Well, let's say Rua, and some comments made about me in the paper, which I don't take offence by much, but I take offence on this one, where the administration recommended that Rua be allowed to operate from that new centre. The administration recommended that. The bunch of professionals who are trained in this job said that. It goes to the elected councillors call it in. And why do they call it in? Because of the interests of a few. Now, the elected representatives go against the recommendation of the professionals on behalf of a few of the vested interests, and they're heroes. The local government's heroes. And I'm the bad person because I'm looking at the whole issue about homelessness. I mean, is that right? Is that right? Like I said, if I went against the interests, if I went against the recommendation from my agency on behalf of a few landowners, what would you be calling me? So this stupid, ridiculous argument that is out there currently. We're planning professionals, and the idea that we cannot have change, Now, yes, the pathway has some discretion. But have you seen we've got design review processes that never existed. When you brought in your DAPs, you had no design review process. You allowed things in the suburbs that you didn't care about. You didn't care about. Members here, I don't know, member for Kingsley in particular, and in relation to some of the things that came as a result of your rules, with no design review process. We have a design review process. We have mechanisms to allow for flexibility when there's a community benefit, and we have a better system of community benefit. My responsibility, I take it seriously, is to create new homes and good places for people to live. It is not to ignore future generations. And I am so sort of tired of the approach you're taking, member, of the divide and conquer. You go to the opening of one Subiaco, which was 24 stories when the local scheme said 16, and you said that was a great result. And if something's 20 centimetres higher than it is a scheme, you call that a bad decision.